As mammals, humans have a four-chambered heart and two essentially separate circulatory loops. One is the pulmonary circulation, in which blood flows between the heart and the lungs. The other is the systemic circulation, in which blood circulates between the heart and the rest of the body. Blood that is loaded with oxygen is carried from the lungs to the left atrium, then to the left ventricle to be dispersed to the tissues of the body. Blood depleted of its oxygen is returned to the heart through the vena cava and then to the right atrium and ventricle, where it's sent back to the lungs to be oxygenated again. The exchange of materials between the blood and tissues occurs in the smallest blood vessels of the body, the capillaries. In the pulmonary capillary bed, the deoxygenated blood cell loads oxygen and unloads carbon dioxide. In the systemic capillary bed, oxygen is delivered to the tissues, and carbon dioxide waste from the tissues enters the bloodstream. The vertebrate heart is a muscular pump that provides the force needed to circulate the blood. The human heart has four chambers, two atria, singular atrium, and two ventricles. The atria are thin-walled chambers of muscle that receive blood returning from the lungs and body, and the ventricles are thick-walled muscular chambers that generate the force to pump blood to the lungs and the rest of the tissues of the body. The right atrium receives oxygen-depleted blood through two veins called the inferior and superior venae cavae, singular vena cava. When the atria contract, blood in the right atrium is forced into the right ventricle. The right ventricle receives blood from the right atrium and, on contraction, sends this deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the lungs through two veins called the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins are the only veins that carry oxygenated blood. When the atria contract, blood in the left atrium is forced into the left ventricle. The left ventricle has the thickest walls of the four chambers. It receives the oxygenated blood from the left atrium and, on contraction, sends it through the aorta to all the tissues of the body. The blood is prevented from flowing backward into the chambers by a system of flap-like valves. The four chambers of the heart alternate between contraction and relaxation in a concerted fashion. This pattern is called the cardiac cycle. A cardiac cycle consists of one complete diastole, the relaxation or expansion phase, and one complete systole or contraction phase. At the start of diastole, the heart muscle is relaxed and blood flows into the atria. Toward the end of diastole, both atria contract simultaneously, followed about a tenth of a second later by the ventricular contraction. Atrial contraction at the end of diastole helps to fill the ventricles with blood immediately prior to the systole, the phase of the cardiac cycle during which both ventricles contract simultaneously. Step by step, the cycle works like this. Diastole begins when the atria relax and blood flows into the heart. Veins that carry deoxygenated blood from the body fill the right atrium. The left atrium is filled by the pulmonary veins, which carry oxygenated blood from the lungs. The atria are now filled with blood, while the ventricles are still relaxed. Some blood flows passively from the atria to the ventricles at this time. The atria contract, forcing blood into the relaxed ventricles. After contraction, the atrial valves prevent the backflow of blood from the ventricles to the atria. Next, the atria relax and the ventricles contract. Deoxygenated blood is pumped out of the right ventricle into the pulmonary arteries and carried to the lungs, while oxygenated blood is pumped out of the left ventricle through the aorta to the rest of the body. Upon relaxation, the pulmonary and aortic semilunar valves prevent the backflow of blood from the exiting blood vessels to the ventricles. One cardiac cycle is completed in less than 1 second. Blood pressure varies according to the cardiac cycle. The diastolic blood pressure is the lowest pressure, occurring during ventricular relaxation. The systolic blood pressure is the peak pressure, which occurs during ventricular contraction. A stethoscope and sphygmomanometer are routinely used to measure diastolic and systolic pressure. The different sounds heard through the stethoscope, called Carot cough sounds correspond to the contraction and relaxation of the heart. The cuff is first inflated so that it compresses the brachial artery. The pressure in the cuff is slowly released, and as it descends, it reaches a point where blood is able to spurt through the constricted artery only at the moments of highest blood pressure. This pressure at which tapping sounds are first heard is the systolic pressure, the blood pressure when the heart is contracting. As the pressure in the cuff continues to drop, a point is reached where the sounds disappear. The blood is now flowing continuously through the brachial artery. The pressure in the cuff when the sounds first disappear is the diastolic pressure, the blood pressure when the heart is relaxing. Blood pressure is reported in fractional notation, with systolic pressure as the numerator and diastolic pressure as the denominator. For example, a normal blood pressure might be 120/80 millimeters of mercury.